October the 25th, 2023. Guys, I know this is a third video today, but things are happening very quickly, and this has come in from the U.S. State Department. And they're evacuating 600,000 Americans from the Middle East. U.S. is also deploying 12 new anti-aircraft systems and an entire squadron of F-16s. They're calling it Armageddon. And it says the FS Tonnerre, which is a French vessel, joins NATO forces. The State Department is evacuating diplomats from Iraq, Bahrain, Kuwait to follow. The U.S. administration is drawing up a plan to evacuate hundreds of thousands of American citizens from the Middle East if the bloodshed in Gaza does not stop. This is according to 4 officials familiar with the U.S. government's emergency planning. Now, all these deadlines that we see from Egypt and Iran, Hezbollah, the entire area, Jordan, is about the bloodshed in Gaza stopping, or something's going to happen. That's why they're calling this, in the title, the first word is Armageddon. By the way, as we look at this, we talk about prophecy. Regardless of who wrote it, it looks like that we're coming to it very quickly. Now, for you guys listening to this as we talk about it, who took down Babylon in the Old Testament? What happened? Why was Babylon destroyed? Of course, God was angry. Who did it? Think about it for a minute, and I'll just go ahead and say it. It was the Persians and the Medes. That empire was raised by God in order to take down Babylon, they were atrocious in the way they treated people, sacrifices, the entire 9 yards. So now it looks like a repeat of the Babylonian story. If you've watched my channel for any period of time in the last 12 or 13 years, you know who I consider Babylon is. It's the nations that turn against God. They don't want to have anything to do with religion. They just want to go full-fledged Sodom and Gomorrah. You know who I'm talking about. It's not just one nation. But it looks like God is taking the Persians, Mede Empire. And by the way, Egypt, who we mentioned in the video earlier, was Persian at that time. Persia had captured all of Egypt, northern Africa. But God uses who he will. And so he raised up the Persians and the Medes. And actually, the way the Medes came into it, I think, is just the changing of the kings and the empires there. But anyway, the Persian Medes took out Babylon. Do you see what's happening now? The Biden administration is drawing up a plan to evacuate hundreds of thousands of American citizens from the Middle East if the bloodshed in Gaza does not stop. Now, these 4 officials speaking on conditions of anonymity because of the details of the internal deliberations said Americans living in Israel and neighboring Lebanon were of particular concern, though they stressed that an evacuation of this magnitude was considered a worst-case scenario. And guys, when you're talking about this article that's titled Armageddon, then that kind of is the worst-case scenario. Whether all of that evacuation will be allowed to take place or not, we don't know. It says the U.S. administration, despite its strong public support for Israel, is deeply concerned by the prospect of escalation and in recent days has turned its attention in part to the complex logistics of moving large numbers of people suddenly, according to 3 of the people familiar with the discussions. Guys, you remember the lightning speed they evacuated our troops and personnel out of Afghanistan? Do you really think they give a damn? There were about 600,000 American citizens in Israel and another 86,000 believed to be in Lebanon when Hamas struck, according to initial State Department estimates. Now, some of those have evacuated, but guys, we've got so many bases in that area. We're talking about at least 1 million plus, maybe 2 million total personnel in the area that would be in harm's way if this goes down. Like I said, my son had two excursions 6 months at a time into the Middle East, but there's dozens and dozens of U.S. bases surrounding that area just to exert control and control the petrodollar. But now the U.S. administration's concern extends beyond these two countries as officials monitor street protests that have spread across the Arab world, putting both U.S. personnel and civilians in the region at increased risk. Now, when they say the Arab world, guys, there's a lot of protest outside of there. England here, many nations, France. Think about it. The Arab world has expanded. Top U.S. officials have been reluctant to publicly discuss such contingency plans, hoping to avoid causing panic among Americans in the region. At the same time, 5 U.S. Air Force C-17A Globemaster III aircraft departed Pope Air Force Base at Fort Liberty, which was Fort Bragg, bound for Europe. All have similar shipping codes. The U.S. plans to send its entire stockpile of Iron Dome missiles to Israel, including 2 artillery pieces and more than 300 missiles. At the same time, 12 anti-aircraft systems are being developed in the Middle East. Now, if you look at the overall scope of the Arab world and what's happening and the reaction from around the planet of what's happening in Gaza, guys, it says, think about this, what Israel is thinking, what the U.S. is doing here. It says this is a THAAD anti-ballistic missile defense system artillery currently en route to where? Not Israel, not any of the friendly nations, or let me back up, not any of the nations that will remain friendly if this continues as far as the bombing in Gaza. Again, this THAAD anti-ballistic missile defense system en route to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, okay, while at least 11 MIM-104 Patriot air defense systems will be deployed to sites in Kuwait, Jordan, who's against Israel, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Some of them are still friendly, but most of them are complaining. So what is the U.S. doing here in arming the people surrounding Israel? We're talking about the Albert Pike letter. Now, let me say this. I'm familiar with the conflict that says the Albert Pike letter was originally World War I and World War II. And World War III, which it talks about, was not in the original letter. I understand that. But what if, just hear me out, if once World War I and World War II played out according to their plans, which we've seen, it's almost biblical, right? Then they came back in and added the World War III part. And what's interesting about the Albert Pike World War III scenario is that once all this happens, that people will be so disillusioned with their religion that they will lose all compass, fall into any kind of trouble, any kind of trap, because they thought there was a Savior coming before this point. Now, going a little deeper into that subject, and we've talked about forced prophecy, pre-planned prophecy, and then the idea that certain players would follow that plan and that we had the ability to see the plans of the enemy because of that. There's always a silver lining, right? But what if there's so much, again, religious disillusionment? That's a key word. How would we be so disillusioned? Maybe it's because some of their plans and pre-planned prophecy is set up to where we're not being told the whole truth. And when we see that we haven't been told the truth and certain things are happening that we're not supposed to really experience, say, or go through, And we say, well, people turn their back against God because there was no Savior there at that point in time. And they become disillusioned and without compass. If that makes any sense, guys, we hope that's not the situation, but I think it is. You see all the prosperity preaching on the top of church channels on TV and all of the YouTube preachers talking about gold and silver when they know it will be cast into the street and cursed because it was the stumbling block God said of his people. It was worthless. They couldn't eat it. They were starving. It was worthless. And the people that are doing this, they have their special place in hell. I'm sorry, pastors. It's on you. You need to change. But this disillusionment is being taught, it's being preached, it's the false witnesses. And so we've got to be prepared, guys, for all situations. We're looking at the physical side in this article, but what about the spiritual side? It's very important to not be disillusioned. When it all hits the fan, don't turn against God. He told you these things were coming and that there would be peace very temporarily and then sudden destruction, right? Just keep that in mind. Back to the article, and some people will say, well, BP, why are you talking about U.S. troop movement? This is released by the Pentagon, okay? Everyone knows it, and even if it wasn't released, most of the nations have the intel. And I'm sure this didn't happen in all states, but early this morning, there were some very heavy jet sounds coming over our home here in central Mississippi. And I think they're moving tremendous amounts of supplies. The C-111s or C-17s or whatever the large ones are called are moving. That could be moving equipment in or possibly getting ready to evac people. It's not what's been happening in the last or in this current administration. It says the U.S. is evacuating diplomatic personnel from Iraq. Some employees of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad and the U.S. Consulate General in Erbil, as well as their family members, will return home. Family members and non-emergency government personnel at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad have been instructed to evacuate due to heightened security threats. Recently, the State Department allowed the families of diplomats and some diplomatic personnel to leave Lebanon. Americans wishing to leave the country were also urged not to delay the departure due to the unpredictable security situation. Those remaining in the country are advised to prepare emergency plans. They know the plan. That's why all of this comes out the way it does. On the table is also the option of evacuating the families of American soldiers, mainly from the bases in Bahrain and Kuwait. But we're sending these people all this weaponry. It would not be a comfortable time to be in Israel. According to the State Department statement, the embassy is aware of threats made on social media by the Al-Wad al-Haq, a military group in Iraq, against U.S. military bases in Kuwait. As a result, the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait limits its activity on U.S. military bases to essential and official events only. U.S. citizens are advised to remain vigilant. Now, the French Navy, again, they announced that the FS Tonnerre, we talked about that, a Mistral-class amphibious assault ship, is currently deployed in the eastern Mediterranean to join NATO naval forces, including the battle group led by the USS Gerald R. Ford. They're off the coast of Israel. It says this French-class helicopter carrier sailed today from the port of Toulon in the south of France. It says during his visit to Cairo, Emmanuel Macron announced earlier today that a French Navy ship would go to support hospitals in Gaza. So what's going on here? It looks like NATO is against any other conflict or any more attacks on the ground in Gaza while the civilians are trapped there. A French plane will also land on Thursday in Egypt to deliver medical supplies. The French president added, clarifying that more will follow. Humanitarian aid has been gathering in Egypt for days before it trickles into Gaza through the Rafah crossing, the only one not controlled by Israel. But when they're bombing that and the exits towards that, it is kind of in control. So we're seeing a chess game played on many levels and very deceitful. And it looks like most of the major players are in on the game. It says Tunnier is a Mistral-class ship. These ships are 199 meters long, guys. That's 600 feet. Are amphibious helicopter carriers and capable of carrying out in a short period of time operations of crisis management, transport, and even evac of patients and medical support by amphibious and aerial means. Everything's being put in place. And guys, you know, we've never had war here in many generations, not since basically the Civil War. It's always been fought on shores overseas. Will that still continue to be the norm, or will there be a great awakening, let me say that, to many folks here? Because many here are basically living in a Babylon situation because they've turned against God and went after their own pleasures. Money, gold, silver, power, greed. Babylon is being set up. God is going to use the people he wishes to do it. Just be prepared here, because if you don't think that the U.S. is probably the leader of Babylon, you're sadly mistaken, my friends. But guys, it's a heads up. Be very safe.